What's up guys, and welcome back to TechPlan. Today I'm going to show you how to propagate jade trees. Let's check it out.
Alright, so I was lucky enough to get a lot of jade cuttings from a friend of mine. So what do you do when you have a surplus of cuttings? Well, it's a great time and opportunity to experiment on how to propagate. We are going to be trying 4 different ways. One is with just normal soil, the other is going to be with actually water, and then 2 different style of perlite propagations, one with a jar and one with a terracotta pot. The first one we're going to be starting off with is going to be the terracotta pot with perlite. The reason I'm choosing a jar and a terracotta pot is really the difference in moisture control. So a terracotta pot is going to leach out moisture much quicker than a jar is because the terracotta itself can breathe and let moisture through it. Now I know there's a lot of people out there in the callus camp. I'm not one of those people. I mean, I'm sure it works, but I like to cut everything fresh when I do any sort of propagating, so that's exactly what I'm doing. And so for this one, I'm just going to bury it in the perlite and water it pretty well. Not so much that there's like inches of water in the bottom, but I'm getting it nice and wet. Next up, I'm going to do just a plain potting soil. I know this works, so that's why we're doing it as almost control. But again, cutting off the callus ends because I just don't like any like old material. I have an opinion that it can rot easier that way, so I like fresh cuts. But anyways, this one is as simple as just jamming it in soil. And again, we're using a terracotta pot because it's going to help everything dry out quicker than if it was a plastic pot. In my opinion, succulents and stuff like that, like jade, cactuses, they all work pretty much the same and they're all pretty easy in my opinion as far as propagating, so this should be a good experiment. Next up is going to be another perlite experiment. I'm trying to do different things now with different materials because everyone has different access. So anyways, perlite, this time in a jar, and this one will actually maintain a lot more moisture because there's a lot less bleed off and it's only from the top. So that's why I want to try this versus a terracotta pot. I want to see how much moisture these really can handle. Lastly, we're going to try water propagation. I've heard some people have success with this with both succulents, jade, aloe, all different stuff. So I want to try this again and just see if it really works. Usually I'm pretty skeptical of this, but that's what experimentation is for, to see if it works and to find out ourselves. Alright, now I usually always leave this information out on accident and people ask a lot, so I'm trying to fix things and make my videos better. So, for watering and light, I'm keeping these near my grow lights, but they're not directly under like getting lambasted, they're just getting good light. And as far as watering, it's probably every 2 to 3 days and only like a tablespoon of water at the center. I'm not dousing these full. I think that just a little bit is all it needs, and that way it can dry out quick and not rot. So that's really my routine. Alright, an entire month has passed since I started this experiment, so let's take a look. I did not do any like interval videos like I usually do because I didn't want to disturb roots on these because they're a lot more fragile and it's a lot more slower of a process. So that's why there's really only going to be the one update that we're seeing now. So let's kick things off with the water one. This is the one that I am most skeptical of. So this is the one I want to find out first if it worked or not. Looking at it right away, it is not looking so good, especially for this one that was in there. It pretty much rotted from the inside out and lost the top head. The head that fell off earlier actually was okay though, for some reason. It's just the entire stem that rotted out. So I could have probably propped the head, but that's in the other room. I don't know if you can see this in the footage, but the dried up leaves are like almost like mica crystals or something. It really has an interesting sparkle to it and it's kind of cool. As I pulled out the other ones that were healthy and looking good, the results were pretty surprising. There's actually a lot of roots on there and a few other surprising things about it. Looking up close at the first one, you can see the entire stem is pretty covered in roots and it's looking fantastic. And if you look at the water line, you'll see that roots were rooting into the water, and there's also a lot of roots just rooting into the air, I'm assuming from the humidity from the water. But something very interesting to notice is there aren't many roots coming out of the actual stem. It's all on nodes that are further up from the actual cutting. Looking at the second stem, you can see this one actually started rotting as well. I can just break off the unhealthy stuff, revealing healthy stuff, so I'm not too worried, but not nearly as many roots as the other cutting. There are literally 1 or 2 roots sprouting out of the stem at different node areas, but that's pretty much it for the stem. If you ignore the mealybugs, you can see that there are roots sprouting more on the newer growth. I don't know if it's from stress from the mealybugs or again from the humidity, but there are roots much higher up and not anywhere near the water. Alright, moving on from the water results, let's take a look at the next most moist one, and that is perlite in the jar. Just from the outer jar, you can see that there's a lot of algae, so there definitely has been wetness in there. a lot wetter than some of the other stuff we're going to see. But let's take a look at the actual cuttings. From the zoomed out approach, you can see that there's new growth starting on multiple areas that was not there from the start, but the rooting doesn't look too crazy on one of the cuttings. However, it does look pretty good on the other. Interestingly enough, on the one with lots of roots, I actually do see roots coming out of the cutting side, and again, like we saw in the previous ones, a lot of roots coming from nodes up the stem. So I didn't expect that. I expected almost all the rooting to occur from the very cutting, but this is really teaching me something interesting. Switching over to the perlite and terracotta pot, this one sadly fell out, which is why you don't get to see the cool, nice, clean video of me pulling it out. One problem I did find with perlite is it's not heavy, and the jade cuttings are very heavy. So you really have to balance things well and nice and bury deep, so you don't have things just falling out of the light perlite. This one did root pretty well, and surprisingly, there is a good amount of roots coming out of the actual cut, which I was surprised to see. And we do see a lot coming out near the newer growth. This might be like agitation from mealybugs, or again, a lot of moisture because these were all on the ground, and the room they're growing in is pretty humid, like around 70 to 60% humidity. Next up, we are going to take a look at the one just in potting soil in a terracotta pot. It looks pretty healthy from the outside, but once I ripped it out, I can see that indeed there are a lot of roots. Not as many as some of the other, but there are roots. These roots again were at the very cutting, right above the cutting at the next node, and just up the stem in general. So this one rooted pretty well. Alright, now that we saw all that, I am going to pot these all up in the same pot, just using some really high perlite mix to soil ratio, so it drains really easily and it should be perfect for these guys. I'm going to keep them all in the same pot just for space savings, and hopefully it turns into one heck of a bush as they get older. Some of my takeaways are from this experiment is water is a little more risky. It almost seems like keeping things right above the water works well. You get nice roots from the humidity, but putting them in the actual water is risky because you can get that stem rot that we did end up seeing. However, the biggest takeaway that I think we can get from this experiment, and probably the most important one, is planting or propagating your cuttings deep. Make sure you get a lot of the stem under the soil, under the perlite, or in that water, so you can get roots all up and down the stem. One of my biggest gripes with jade plants is their weight. They're very hard to manage, and they can tip over really easily or pull out of the soil. However, if you're planting them very deep, you can see you'll get a ton of roots all up the stem, which will really help anchor your jade plant. So if there's one thing you should take away from this experiment, it's not so much the medium you're going to use, but it's how deep you plant the jade. I think you'll find a lot of success if you do this when you go to repot and everything, and they're not just going to fall over, and you'll have a really good supporting root structure.
Well guys, that pretty much sums up this video. I hope you enjoyed the experiment and the different methods I tried. I hope you guys saw the main takeaway being plant those stems deep so you get a nice robust root structure, so that way it doesn't tip out of the pot easily. That's my biggest issue with jade, is it always wants to fall over because it's so top heavy. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.